Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, welcome, I'm so happy you're here. My name's Leora and I talk on air about books and writing sometimes as well. And today I am here with my must-read feminist non-fiction book recommendations. So this video has been in the works for an incredibly long time because I've always wanted to do like a non-fiction recommendations video where I talk about my favorite feminist non-fiction. I wanted the list to sort of be well-rounded, and of course I have my own taste in what I find interesting in non-fiction, but still I wanted to have several different topics in feminist literature discussed. And I feel like I finally compiled a list now that sort of is deemed a little bit worthy enough to go onto YouTube. So here we are. I've tried to make the list so that there's something for everybody on there. So there's some books that are a little bit more academic and maybe a little bit more difficult. There's some books that are super accessible to literally anybody who wants to read them that are sort of fun as well. There's books that focus on different topics within feminism, so I've tried to make it as well-rounded as possible. So hopefully there's something in there that will interest you. Before we get into the video, I'm not a man hater. I do not hate men. I just think that men and women should be equal. If you're a man, these book recommendations can still be super helpful for you if you want to learn more about feminism and inequality and equality. So definitely keep watching. If you're somebody who's angry already at the world and at feminists, then maybe this is not for you. So, just saying. But before we get into the book recommendations, this portion of today's video is being sponsored by our friends over at Book of the Month. So if you've watched my channel for a bit, you know all about Book of the Month. They are one of my favorite companies to work with because I genuinely love their service so much. So they are a super popular and fast growing online service for readers. Their mission is to promote new and emerging authors, and their team vets through hundreds of books each month, and then they make a curated selection and you get to choose from that selection. This way you can spend a lot more time reading and a lot less time researching. And in their selection, there's always lots of new and early release titles, so oftentimes it's books that were already on my radar, which is what I really love about it. So I'd like to highlight two of this month's selections. First one is Did You Hear About Kitty Carr by Crystal Smith Paul. This is a historical fiction debut and it reminded me a lot of Evelyn Hugo, but it sounds extra more intriguing. And when you open it, it says a multi-generational saga that traverses the glamour of old Hollywood and the seductive draw of modern day showbiz. I love reading about famous people. It's one of my favorite things, so I can't wait to dive into this one. Then I also had to get The Last Word by Taylor Adams because this sounds so scary, but so good. So this is a thriller and we follow Emma Carpenter. She is house sitting and she posts this review of a horror novel that she read and she did not enjoy. And then she starts experiencing very scary things and it seems that the author of the book is coming after her. So that sounds very interesting. We love a book that does this sort of book in a book thing. Always really enjoy that. Book of the Month ships to the US and Canada, and next to all of this, they are also risk-free. You can skip any month, anytime, and not be charged, which is of course wonderful. And next to all of these amazing benefits, they also have the best price in new release hardcover fiction. In fact, you can get your first book for only $5 using this month's code FLOWERS because it's the springtime. So don't forget to check out this month's picks and head on over to bookofthemonth.com using my code FLOWERS. And thank you so much for Book of the Month for sponsoring my videos and enabling me to keep creating content on here. And now let's get on to the rest of the video. Thank you. So the first book I want to talk about is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. If you've been on this channel for longer than 0.03 seconds, then you know that I love this book. I sincerely love it so much and I think it is such a wonderful read, and there's just so many things about this book that I love. So this is the true story of Chanel Miller and how she was raped at a party at Stanford, and it is absolutely horrible. But the thing is, the way Chanel writes is so beautiful and sort of heartbreaking but heartwarming at the same time, and she also writes about her love for art and life and theatre, and it's not just about this one horrible thing that happened to her. So it really shows like her love for her family and culture as well, and like sort of the multifacetedness of something like this happening to a person. I'm not sure if multifacetedness is a word, but I guess you know what I mean. And next to that, why I think this is such an important feminist read specifically is because it really shows so many layers and aspects of rape culture and sort of the culture that we live in, and how difficult it is when you are going through such a hard thing. So she'd been raped, which is horrible, but there's so many people then that sort of criticize her instead of the actual rapist, that still put him on a pedestal and sort of look at his former achievements instead of who she is as a person and how her life was ruined and what were her achievements, you know? And that is just so agitating, and it really shows how there's so many layers throughout which this works, like throughout which sexism is spread into our society. And I think especially if you're a man and you've never really experienced what it's like to be a woman in our world, then this is such a helpful book, because it shows as well how you can be scared just walking outside, how you can be scared to be looked at, how you can be scared to get sort of remarks from men talking to you, and how it can sort of change your mindset if you have a few bad experiences. Because at some point, if a man talks to you and you're nice, it's sort of a risk, because if you're nice, you never know what they want, and you never know if they want something from you, and that's really scary. And I think that aspect is shown so well in this book, and like the whole dynamic between men and minorities and other people is shown just really well. And apart from all that, it's just a beautiful story. It is so well written. Of course, the things happening in it are absolutely horrible, but it's just put down onto paper so well. And yeah, there were so many passages that made me sort of feel love for Chanel and her family and her work and her art, and then at the same time, of course, I felt horrible for the things that happened. But just such a wonderful book, such a good book, highly recommend. It's sort of a memoir slash autofiction, so I would compile it into the non-fiction list, but if you're looking for something that is more sort of straight up non-fiction with like facts, then I also have a book for you. I would recommend Feminism Interrupted by Lola Olufemi, which is one of the best feminist non-fictions I've read, I think, in recent years. This book dives into many topics, many like basic topics within feminism, so it's definitely a good base book to start with, although it is a bit more on the academic side. But what I liked especially about this novel is that Lola Olufemi really shows sort of our hypocrisy when it comes to feminism and religion. So for example, a lot of times when bad things happen in Islamic cultures and within like the Islamic religion, then lots of people are like, oh right, you see, the Islam is bad, basically, even though that's not how it works, because when something bad would happen to like a white woman who's a Christian, then way less people would think and assume it's because of her Christianity. And so there's like this weird link there, where people criticize a culture and a religion before they sort of look at the societal structures that are woven throughout our whole society, like in every religion. And I thought that was really interesting, because it also shows that sexism is not inherent to different cultures or religions, even though there is definitely sexism in different countries seen in different forms. Not sure if I'm doing a good job at explaining this. I can sort of already feel loads of criticism bubbling up in the comments, although I know there will be angry men in the comments anyway, so maybe I should just let it go. I thought this was a wonderful read. Also, if you want to learn more about women in the workplace and workplace inequality, and if you want to make your feminist reading list a bit more intersectional, then this is also a great place to start. Another book I would love to recommend is Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tausig, which is a book all about disability. And what I thought was so wonderful about this book is that it really sort of shows the intersection of disability and being a woman and feminism, because it also talks about motherhood for a bit and like sort of considering being a mother, and it also talks about being single versus being in a relationship and how that sort of interweaves with being a woman and being a feminist and being in a wheelchair. And I thought those were like so many interesting sort of bits that I'd never thought about, and it really rounded out my knowledge of feminism all over. Next to that, it is also wonderfully written, and it really shows how oftentimes it's not the actual disability making your life so much harder, although it can definitely make your life harder, but it's more so that the society is just built for able-bodied people and not for disabled people. And this book really showed like that extra layer to being a woman, and then also being a woman in a wheelchair. So I thought that was really wonderfully done. And next to that, Rebecca Tausig is also just a great author. Same as with these other ones, just beautiful prose, like very poetic at some points. And I also love that this is sort of essays and like memoir-esque essays, and I love that type of stuff, so really good. Then another book I would love to recommend is Amateur by Thomas Page McBee. This is like sort of bordering fiction, non-fiction, because I'm not entirely sure if it's a fictional story or that it's based on Thomas Page McBee's life, so I don't really know, but I still decided to include it on this list because it's just such a wonderful book and I haven't talked about it that much. So this is a story of a journalist who is a trans man, and so he has experienced both womanhood in a sort of way and also experienced being a man, and he's really trying to figure out like what is masculinity, what defines these gender roles, and like how does that all work out. It's very nuanced and very intricate and like sort of complicated, so if I'm doing a bad job, I'm sorry, but read the book and you will get what I mean. And basically he goes into boxing to write this article because he's a journalist about boxing. And along the way, he gets different coaches, different co-trainers, you know, who he trains with, and he learns more and more about boxing, but also about aggression and sort of the way aggression forms our society and like connections between men and women and how we all handle our aggression, but also the way other people view aggression based on what gender the person is that is expressing the aggression, which really varies. When a woman is being assertive, we view that as aggressiveness, even though when a man is being assertive, we just think, oh my god, he's a leader. That is something that's shown really well in this book, and it's really on the cross section of sort of what does it mean to be a man or a woman, and like how does that play into a life, especially if you've experienced both sides of the coin, but you are a man. Especially also some passages where Thomas Page McBee writes about sort of walking down the street as a man and suddenly realizing that the woman in front of him is sort of afraid of him, which was a really interesting thing to read about. So that's also a book I would definitely recommend. Another non-fiction feminist book I would like to recommend is Thick by Tressie McMillan Cottom, which is an essay collection basically about all different feminist subjects. I thought the essay about medical racism and especially medical sexism catered towards black women was really, really impressive and heartbreaking and like a difficult subject to read about, but the statistics and the way that Tressie McMillan Cottom explains the whole thing is just so well done, and it really learned me a lot of things. Many good essays in here, and I definitely saw a whole different point of view within the subject of feminism, which I think is really important, because oftentimes when it comes to minorities, it's sort of layers. So you can be a woman, but then if you're black or if you're disabled, or, you know, these things play into it as well, and that's really important when you're learning about these subjects. Another book which I've talked about before, but which is just a book that I love so much, is Word Slut by Amanda Montell. This is all about linguistics, so sort of how has gender and our view of gender roles impacted our language, and how does language impact our social status anyway, but then the extra layer on top of sexism. And it also talks about workplace language, formal language, how do women write emails, how do men write emails, how do they communicate, what's the differences between them, what is natural and what is actually just gender roles, and like how does that all play into sexism in our society. So many interesting things, especially the chapters about how we look at sex and how we talk about sex. So interesting. So yeah, definitely something I would recommend, and also a very witty book. So if you're looking for something that's not too difficult to read, but that's definitely still sort of enjoyable, but will learn you many things about feminism, then this is a really good one. And then last but not least, I wanted to close off these recommendations with a book that is a bit more like fun and lighthearted instead of like talking about difficult subjects. That is A Girl's Guide to Personal Hygiene by Tallulah Pomeroy. This is definitely not a book you should read if you're not into like gross things, and I will explain it further, but basically this is a sort of zine style book that shows all sorts of gross things that women do, and of course not all women do these things, but for me it was definitely relatable at some points, although at other points I was like, who does that? Who actually does that? So the basic concept of this book is that Tallulah Pomeroy once started this Facebook group, I think, where her female friends and family could sort of show like the dirty things that they do. So for example, like smell their own armpits or study their menstruation when it comes out of them, stuff like that, like a little bit gross stuff, you know? And she basically started this group so that people could share their experiences, but now she's bundled all these experiences and then also has made illustrations next to it. So it's also a book that is sort of trying to say like, yeah, women are not all flowers all day long, and they also do things that are kind of gross because they are humans, surprise. So yeah, it's definitely more a lighthearted read. It didn't really learn me anything except for like, there's a lot of gross things that people do. And yeah, it was just a fun read and I had a good time reading it. Okay, so those were some of my favorite feminist books. Definitely let me know in the comments down below, what is your favorite feminist book? And if you have any recommendations for me maybe, and if you don't know what to comment, then leave some nice feminist emojis. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!